go ahead and share my screen.
Okay, so I've started the recording so that we can make this a permanent video for those who can't.
Yes. And is everybody able to see the screen?
Yes, Catherine. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let me, I guess, go ahead and get started.
Oh, is it okay to do a brief intro live?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, please do.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Huang, and I think Dr. Schwarin, I know, had a very late shift in the emergency room yesterday, so may not be able to join us, but one of our community consultants, Ms. Tony Hines, is here, and we really wanted to use the 5 minutes live allotted to us for our consultants to be able to talk about the experience of this community engaged research project. So Dr. Schwarin and I in advance recorded this brief video to go through the nuts and bolts of the poster, but we were really hoping to use our live time for a consultant to reflect. So I just wanted to check in about how our time's used and make sure Ms. Hines can speak.
Would you like me to play the video that I think has just started, or?
If we only have 5 minutes, I would actually opt to let our consultant speak.
Got it.
How many minutes is the video?
It's about 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 5. We're supposed to be about 5. Yeah. Is that true? We just have 5 minutes to present?
Yes, I believe that's the case.
Okay, so I might actually just show our poster and then we'll open it up to be able to talk a little more flexibly. Thanks.
Are folks seeing the poster now?
Yes, although it's a little small.
A little hidden. Yeah, let's see if I can make it a bit bigger. I don't want to go to the next one. I'm not sure I can make it a bit bigger. I'll try to work on that, but if you wanted to sort of go ahead and get started.
Yeah, I can give just a really quick intro to our project, which is called Addressing Racism in Mental Health Emergency Settings. And our abbreviation is ARIES, which we decided was a strong horoscope sign representing our project. And it's a mixed methods community engaged project. And the goal, and my name's Allison Huang. I'm a psychiatrist and research fellow at UCSF. And my kind of listed co-presenter is Vidya Eshwaran, who's an emergency medicine physician who was a fellow here, now is on faculty at Baylor. And we have a number of other wonderful co-authors on our team who I want to acknowledge. Aude Boignan and Monique Lessar at the Rafiki Coalition in San Francisco, Paula Fleischer, who I see here from the Center for Community Engagement, our fabulous community consultants on the project, Queen Vanessa Banks, Tony Hines, who is here, and Vanessa Jackson, and then Rosny Daniel and Will Martinez, who are junior faculty at UCSF in psychiatry and emergency medicine. And our project really focuses on ways to address race-based differences and bias in mental health emergency settings specifically. And we are really interested in addressing, understanding the race-based differences in the use of physical restraints in psychiatric emergencies at UCSF and addressing it in a two-part way. So we have 2 aims. The first aim is to use electronic health record data and analyze that data to quantify if there are race-based differences in the use of physical restraints. And our second aim is engaging with community stakeholders and focus groups to develop a plan, an action plan for change at UCSF and then in the San Francisco community more widely. And this whole process is guided by community advisory consultants. And we are very much in the thick of the project. We just had a community consultants meeting last night. And so we've really identified, in this poster, we identify a number of ways that UCSF could better support the process. We were very grateful to get funding from UCSF that was specifically for anti-racism work. and also really grateful for the support from the Center for Community Engagement. We did identify a number of barriers, both in trying to compensate community. Oh, and our community partner, I'm sorry to neglect that, is Rafiki Coalition, which is a San Francisco-based organization that focuses on Black health and wellness. And here we identify a number of ways that UCSF could better support ways we compensate our partners, help them get on the IRB, and have overall structures to help have more flexible timelines. So I wanted to defer to Ms. Hines and hear about experiences, anything really you want to talk about, your reflections, being a community consultant on the project, what motivated your involvement, and how it's been.
Thank you, and give me a hands up when it's time to wrap it up. Grand Rising, everyone. I am Tony Hines. I am a proud member, African-American member living in San Francisco, and I'm really passionate about supporting mental health in my community. There's been a lot of stigmas about getting mental health support as far as therapy. At Rafiki, there is no stigma. They break the walls down. We go into Rafiki, we're getting not only therapy, but we're doing it in action, maybe having Tai Chi, learning about nutrition, just building trust and letting us know it's okay to say you're not okay. It's okay to reach out for help in community or definitely with professionals. Also, I've had some challenges because I've had a son that was killed, and Rafiki was a lifeline. I was able to go there and get free massages, learn about trauma recovery. Because one thing we even talked about yesterday, Black folks know about trauma. We don't want you just to talk to us about trauma. What about recovery? What about some examples? What about building off of what we already know? So for example, there's a tool called the racial battle fatigue. There's post-traumatic slave syndrome that Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about, and Rafiki has brought her in, that talks about intergenerational trauma. So I like being part of the solution. I myself utilize Rafiki. I love being on the board because I said nothing about us without us is for us. It's like when people come from the medical field, sometimes they think they know what's better for someone who's living through the trauma, when again, we have thousands of years and hundreds of years and on how to solve some of our own problems. Like, it might be some sound therapy. My grandmother used to wring her hands, and as a child, you're like, why are they wringing their hands? Now we know about pressure points. So she was healing herself. So I like the fact that Rafiki and UCSF is listening to us, letting us talk about some of our experiences in the emergency rooms and ways to make it more uniform, ways to make it more safe for the community and the staff. So yeah, and I like being part of this group because two of the ladies, the other community members on it, we actually do work in the community. And we do it on our own time often. Like we'll go out, we go to community events, we'll feed the community, we listen to the community, and we're well respected. So we bring back the information from our personal experience, but also from our community. And no, we don't speak for everyone, but we're getting input from a lot of different people. So I think that's the main thing I wanted to make sure to say, that they identified us three. They see the work that we're doing in the community. One of our community partners actually works in the emergency room. So she has the firsthand experience of seeing how Black people may be treated different or less than or yelled at or police coming to restrain them because they're talking to themselves. Well, they wouldn't be there if they weren't having, the emergency, as opposed to other people that come in there who aren't Black and they're like, oh, have a seat. Would you like some water? The disparate treatment. So she's definitely on the ground. I'm more into the community, seeing some of the before and after effects of the trauma, but she's there before, after, and during. So is there anything else I should add?
That was fabulous. I think that was a really comprehensive view of what we're working on and what your work is and what the other consultants' work is. Thanks so much. We're really glad you're here.
Thank you.
This is a great example of a collaborative effort to try and address an important problem. Do you know? I don't know very much about the Rafiki Coalition. Do you know what where their funding sources are and how they get their funding?
Good question. I wish Dr. Mo were here. She's the executive director, and she sends her apology. She wasn't able to attend today. But I know that they do have a number of grants that help fund them. And in fact, our grant, part of the what we really wanted to do was to have at least half of our grant funding go to Rafiki to support their work and the community consultants' work. So I think as far as I know in terms of collaborations, but unfortunately I don't know what their other sources of funding are. Yeah, Dr. Monique Lassar would be the person who would have that information.
It's such a clear example of what you can accomplish when people come together and work towards a goal. Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to make sure we have time for all of the remaining presenters. Is it okay if we move to the next presenter? Thank you so much for sharing about this project. Would you like to introduce the next presenter, Victor, or?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out the order of the short orals.
Yeah, I have it in front of me.
Do you mind?
Sure. So the next presenter is Chinamoso. I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly, Okori. And the project is titled the Bayview Hunters Point Residential Family History Study.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. My name is Chinamoso Okori, and I'm here representing the Helen Dillard Family Comprehensive Cancer Center and the Bayview Advocates, who is one of our primary partners on this project. And also representing a perfect example of being a San Francisco native and doing research for the community by the community. This project was called the Bayview Hunters Point Residential Family History Study. And the study was really created to focus on exposure science and addressing the challenges around exposure science, which are difficulties around defining the length of one's exposure or the proximity around one's set exposure. And current ways of measuring and assessing exposure include using individual interviews or administrative data collected citywide, individual residents across San Francisco. Each method has its limitations. Using interviews alone are subject to recall bias, and the administrative data may have limitations around capturing residential histories if they are not based on a more dynamic financial transactions, such as mortgages, car loans, which most people use information for, credit card applications, and financial insights, etc. This is a particular concern because it may disproportionately influence how we understand the connections between toxic exposure and disease outcomes, especially locally in places like the Bayview Hunters Point, which has been ridiculed with exposure as one of the country's most contaminated Superfund sites. So Bayview is known for its toxic exposure, which include asbestos, air pollution, suspected soil, ground, and water contamination from the former Naval Radiological Defense laboratories that were once on site in the area, and high cancer rates and chronic diseases like lung cancer and asthma. So the goal of this project was twofold. One, to strengthen our relationship with our partners in the Bayview Hunters Point And second was to assess a group-based ethnography approach to defining residential histories to aid in the recall while comparing our ethnographic findings to available residential histories used in the administrative data. So our methods and approach included finding who was eligible, mainly residents who lived in the Bayview for 20 plus years, which is actually really hard to find as the population of Black and Brown people in San Francisco slowly declines. We collected data using group ethnographs on Zoom, using maps for locating where people have lived in the past. The recorded interviews were transcribed, coded, and we used it to pull out themes about, how people define things like family, home, what does it mean to, be from San Francisco? And maps are made using locally available data about where toxins have been known to be in the area. So our results were, we were able to interview 20 index primary residents. When people were asked to define home, some emergent themes were home was defined as family, a place of love, a safe space, a space of peace. We developed a packet of information for the community to ensure that we were actually giving back. We shared back in a community forum at the Dr. Davis Senior Center, another of our partners that we would like to acknowledge. And this helped us achieve our first goal, which was enhancing community relationships and the promise to give back and stay engaged, which we hope to do in the future through one of our collaborations, which I will talk about later. In the LexisNexis data, we were able to find a majority of our participants, but some required additional work to find them, and 15% of those people were not found in LexisNexis at all. All right, let's see. So in summary, the administrative data isn't enough to define residential histories and communities with dynamic financial mobility. And this is a very broad statement. So people who may live in a single unit household, may live in a multi-generational household, which was owned by a great-great-grandmother or a grandmother herself. These are all moving pieces, whether you've been incarcerated, that need to be taken into account. Group-based ethnographies revealed a broader definition of home. It added context to mobility. It also added context to the data that we are seeing or collecting. So including, we're looking at two things: where you stay versus where you live, which means permanent address doesn't necessarily mean where a person stays. And a lot of San Francisco natives, if they ever went to school in San Francisco, would be able to kind of identify with this. Most people went to school on the west side of San Francisco, even though they might have lived on the east side of San Francisco. These are elements that cannot be captured in LexisNexis because the data relies on permanent addresses, and traditionally that defines where you live. The implications of this is how we interpret residential histories and their relationship to environmental exposure. Now, one of the limitations of our study was that the sample size was small. We would hope or would prefer to interview more people. And maybe if we had interviewed more people, we could potentially find more participants using the administrative data. But we have to take note, again, the exodus of Black people and low-income families out of the Bay Area who have historically probably been living in these areas and can help define what exposure looks like. Now, implications. The implications of this data and why this is important to us at the Helen Diller Cancer Center is because the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, is making efforts to link administrative data to cancer outcomes. using the Sears database. We need to proceed with caution on how we use this data to assess links between the administrative data that define residential histories and cancer outcomes. Our work strengthened our relationship with community members. Me personally, it helped me meet some OG people in the Bay Area, and hold on to their stories and remember who they are. We laid a foundation for our next project, which is the California Breast Cancer Research Program grant. And we are currently training community members on how to investigate the connections between toxic contamination and health. Again, I'd like to acknowledge our funding source here at UCSF. I would also like to acknowledge the Helen Diller Cancer Center for giving me this opportunity to participate in such a project and really lead it. And our Bayview diaspora, our Bayview advocates, and the Southeast Community Council and the Dr. Davis Senior Center. Thank you.
That was a really nice presentation. Is it how do I pronounce your first name?
Chinomso.
Chinomso, yeah. I have a couple questions actually. One is in your this is really it sounds like this is really an effort to try and link residential locations and cancer risk, correct?
Right.
And as you proceed through the Bayview, as you proceeded through the Bayview Hunters Point, are your study participants given surveys to get that history of cancer, or how do you get the data? How do you get the cancer correlation?
So how we pull in the cancer information is, like I said before, we have some maps here that we presented to that community had requested. And these maps look at what we call health or environmental exposure indicators. Although I can't zoom in right now, you can see that hopefully the purple one is leukemia and the green one is looking at lung cancer. And they're both from the California Cancer Registry data and the California health maps that I believe are open source to people in the public. Now, you can see that not just the Bayview is highlighted, it's the darkest part in the area, but it also includes Sunnyvale, San Bruno, and other counties, which means that the data isn't telling us specifically who's being affected by certain types of cancers. It's not clear, or the data is not accurately representing the number of people that are in this area, which I believe was the main reason why the map was reconstructed to avoid specificity. When you do census tract data, you don't want your data points to be too few in an area, because then you can kind of identify those people that live in that area. So that means that this administrative data that we're using, if it's used to represent cancer patients that live in this area, and we know word of mouth as a native, I know a ton of people who have a family member who's had cancer or has cancer, and you're only using the permanent addresses to identify who these people are, you might be losing a lot of people, and that's the connection.
Okay, thank you. My second question was, are there efforts underway to try and identify the specific environmental toxins that may be responsible for the increased risk of cancer seen?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, it just went out a little bit on my end.
Yeah. Are there efforts underway to identify the specific toxins that are thought to potentially be increasing the risk of cancer in the region that you speak to?
So there are a few there. We identify them as radiological cancers. An example of that would be leukemia. And what we're trying to see in this region, especially with training people in our next project, which is the California Breast Cancer Research Program, although we're starting with breast cancer, we really want to kind of branch out and grow from there and talk about other cancers, specifically radiologic, sorry, that word is a tongue twister for me today, radiological cancers that can be found in this particular area. And that doesn't just include leukemia. That could be that could also be prostate cancer. It could also be lung cancer. It's very broad. Non-lymphomic, my tongue. Sorry, non-lymphomic, can't say it. Sorry, Hodgkin's lymphoma, for example.
So to summarize, it sounds like a major focus and trying to understand better, there is a substantial radiation exposure risk in the Bayview Hunters Point, and that exposure risk is now being assessed as a potential link to other cancers, including breast cancer.
Right.
And non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and other cancers as well.
Right. So asbestos, for example, can be linked to, there's been known high rates of asbestos in the Bayview with the construction and redevelopment. Things that we should look out for is lung cancer, right? Yeah,
great. Let's see, are there any questions in the chat? Hold on.
There was one clarifying question in the chat about that one of the maps, does it refer to Sunnyvale or Sunnydale?
Oh, Sunnydale. Yeah. Sunnyvale is, I think, after San Bruno, sorry.
How are we doing on time?
We have about 30 seconds left for this presenter.
Okay. I don't see any new questions. That was a very such a nice presentation, and I applaud the work that you're doing and your team are doing. So important.
All right, thank you. And I'd like to give a shout out to Dr. Rhodes, who has given me this opportunity to come into this space and continue to do work like this. And the Bayview community, who not only allowed me to have conversations with them about this, because it's hard to do this kind of work. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes listening as well. Yeah.
Let me see. So our next presenter is, hold on a second. Our next presenters are Natasha Borgen, Morgan Love, and Shira Rutman. The title of their project is Examining Domestic Violence Among American Indian and Alaska Native Communities in California, the Red Women Rising Project.
Hello, everyone. Very grateful to be in this space with all of you. My name is Morgan Love. I'm a Tlingit native and I work at the California Consortium for Urban Indian Health. And I'm presenting with my colleague Natasha, who represents UCSF. I just want to give a content warning. This poster does contain information about domestic violence. So, if this is too triggering, if you need to step out and listen, I totally services for natives across California. Specifically, our Red Women Rising project supports culturally responsive domestic violence services for urban Indians by providing advocacy and public awareness, as well as helping collaborations between urban Indian health organizations and domestic violence service providers. So in this project, we really saw a call for data and a need for it when supporting our community and applying for grants. It's like, where is this data? It doesn't really exist that much in the literature. So that's why we partnered with UCSF to collect more data and help conduct an environmental scan. We did this by interviewing 6 American Indian Alaska Native survivors, as well as 5 domestic violence advocates from organizations across the state. They participated in confidential semi-structured interviews, and we used structural and emerging coding of qualitative data and sort of information into the key themes you see on the poster. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Natasha.
Thanks, Morgan. Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha. I'm a research staff at the Institute for Health Policy Studies here at UCSF. And just for some context, right now we're working on finalizing a report that's going to publish all these findings, and we've really worked hard to condense it into this little poster. And so I'll just briefly touch on some of the main results. So advocates and survivors identified themes that are essential for addressing domestic violence in Native communities. And 9 of these major themes are laid out here on the poster, and we think that they really clearly lend themselves to some direct recommendations. All interviewees stress the importance of acknowledging the root causes of violence from the colonization of the Indigenous people of the United States. This has led to centuries of violent policies, ongoing systemic oppression, and experiences of intergenerational violence within communities. Interviewees also highlighted how this history has impacted survivors' ability to navigate systems that are key to accessing services and resources. So I want to read one example that an advocate gives here. It's under the Confront Systemic Challenges box, and it's an example of how institutional racism creates barriers. And they say, assuming one's ethnicity based on what they look like or their name, skin color, or whatever, I think is a problem when it comes to things like interactions with law enforcement, interactions with the courts, and interactions when people pass away in the morgue is working with law enforcement. So that is really just touching on the misclassification of Native people when they're coming into contact with these systems. Another major theme is addressing the impact of violence on communities. And participants talked about how stigma and shame create barriers for survivors, and how there's this normalization of violence over time within communities. Many spoke on the importance of valuing Native knowledge. This included how Native identity and tradition serves as strengths in healing and community connectedness. Many also spoke about the importance of understanding what accountability and community justice looks like from the perspective of domestic violence survivors and community members. There's also a strong call to focus on culturally specific services when designing programs and interventions, especially on needs that have already been identified as essential by DV advocates. And this included safe housing, mental health services, and support groups. And another quote that is from one of the survivors' interviews, they say that the processes need to be developed by us because we know ourselves best, we know our community best, and we know our family dynamic best. And so this, again, is just touching on this idea that the Native community members and survivors really know what they need and should be listened to. Another important theme was the importance of education and training on Native history. And this was mentioned for the broad public, but especially for law enforcement and DV service providers. The prevention programming specifically for youth was also brought up as an important strategy to break the cycle of intergenerational trauma and spread awareness of what a healthy relationship looks like. On a policy level, there were 2 big recommendations, and this included investing in partnerships with Native leaders, as well as aligning policy and funding with the needs that have been identified by DV experts. And just one more quote from an advocate, and this is the last one on the poster. They say that the holistic idea of service is important. I've seen in the past where we've limited ourselves to only providing assistance with transportation and emergency food when we write our programs or we write our grants or whatever it may be. When we write that in a holistic way, it opens it up for us to really consider all the different needs of a client.
And with all those amazing themes that emerge with the coding, a major overarching theme of all these recommendations are that tribes and urban Native communities know what they need to address DV or domestic violence in their communities and should be funded to lead these efforts. Furthermore, state and federal budgets should include long-term investments for a holistic response to domestic violence that aligns with the scope of the issue and with the acknowledgement of historical policies at the root of domestic violence in Native communities. So we hope to finish writing and disseminate this report by the end of the year. And again, I also want to acknowledge that it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present this poster with you all at this time. Thank you.
That was really nice. Nice summary, nice focus, and obviously a really challenging problem. Are there any, let's see, are there any questions regarding this poster? And I'm directing that to the audience. Do you feel like the funding is increasing towards addressing domestic violence in the state of California? It's, you know, awareness is a big part of this, but obviously beyond awareness, addressing how to, you know, how to deal with and how prevention and other aspects of it. If you can comment.
I think working in a Native organization, we can see other nonprofits or grant opportunities that come about. But when it comes to funding, like the Indian Health Service for programs, or, you know, making traditional healers billable, struggle in the overall institutional system with lack of funding.
So it remains a huge problem.
I think I may have missed what you said. Sorry, I don't know if
it sounds like it remains, funding still remains a major barrier to achieving success.
For sure.
To combat domestic violence in the Native American populations. Yeah.
I do see that there's one comment in the chat from Roberto. And also Chinomso as well.
Looks like
I can,
okay.
I can read Roberto's comment. So powerful and refreshing to hear the voices of those disparately burdened health inequity, rather than more description of disparity with no insight into why. Can community members speak to what enables their partnership with us?
Can you clarify what you mean about the question partnership?
Bertrand, I don't know if you can come off mute or if you're able to. If not, maybe trying to clarify in the chat. Oh.
So what I mean is, for the Aries project, for example, what enables Tony to make time to be able to show up and participate for those partners examining exposures and health outcomes? You know, what for those who aren't scientists, getting a salary to be a scientist, what enables them to partner with us? For the Native folks who shared their perspectives, what enabled them to be participants in that work? You know, so in all the ways that community folks partner with us, what enables them to do so? If they're not career scientists, they're not students.
I think to answer your question, for everyone we interviewed and the network of other DV organizations we have throughout this project, I think we're very grateful we established trust with everyone in our DV network, everyone who was an advocate, and when contacting and interviewing the survivors, the trust was there because there's Natives in the room interviewing them. And I think that really speaks to, you know, community engaged participatory research in our methodology, because we, you know, grounded it in trust and safety.
And
Beautiful, thank you.
Oh, I was just gonna add that you know, UCSF was brought on as just really external consultants and thought partners, but really took the lead from Sakui and Red Women Rising Project to just help, you know, with the transcriptions and some research strategies. So I think it was really led by our community partners, this project.
And I would add for the ARIES project, Ms. Tony had to drop off for another meeting she has, but we make a point of compensating our community partners well and really financially valuing them for their time and contributions.
Let's move on to the next and last presenter. The next presenter is Charles Winden, and the name of the presentation is Addressing Disparities in ADRD Through More Inclusive Research, a Community Engagement Pilot During COVID-19.
Thank you for the introduction. As was mentioned, my name is Charles Winden. I'm an assistant professor in the Memory and Aging Center here at the University of California, San Francisco. This project was really inspired by the lack of representation in Alzheimer's disease and related dementia research of diverse populations. So within our own center, prior to the COVID pandemic, we had no actual sustained relationships with the African American community in the San Francisco Bay Area around the purposes of research engagement. And so we sought to change this once I think we had settled into the pandemic. We asked ourselves, how can we potentially build sustainable relationships that really are representative of tremendous trust that facilitate engagement in research during an incredibly difficult time. And so what we did was we tracked during the course of the pandemic, again, over the course of a year from February of 2021 until February of 2022, our different efforts in terms of engagement and really building an engagement methodology. One of the big issues with regards to engagement in Alzheimer's disease and related dementia research is that there's not a clear methodology that has been put forth that has been demonstrated to be effective across communities, across cultures, et cetera. And so we focus, as I mentioned, primarily on the San Francisco Bay Area region. We not only wanted to focus on engagement of predominantly African American communities, but we also wanted to really emphasize engagement of vulnerable communities. And so we were very deliberate in terms of our outreach efforts. The maps that you actually see on the poster are maps of two measures. One is the Area Deprivation Index, which is the top map. The bottom map is the Social Vulnerability Index. I think folks are maybe a little bit more familiar with the Social Vulnerability Index. The Area Deprivation Index is actually a measure of neighborhood disadvantage by census tracts, and you essentially can construct an entire kind of color-coded map of the Bay Area as well as the rest of the country, really defining areas where there is more vulnerability from a neighborhood level standpoint. Some of the variables that go into this measure include things like average household income, access to health care, access to public transportation, among other things as well. And so through our efforts, we were able to engage just in a year's, I think Zoom might have dropped off, but through our efforts in just a year's time, we were able to engage over 20 different organizations, and we were able to sustain relationships actually with 14 of them. The maps that I mentioned in terms of the types of organizations that we were engaging in, the neighborhoods that we were engaging, the average area deprivation index of the organizations that we engaged was 3.75. It's a scale of about 1 to 10. With 10 being the most disadvantaged. We did have representation all the way up though to 8. So we were engaging with a number of organizations really located in highly vulnerable areas. Our average SVI of the organizations that we engaged was 0.76, and it ranged from 0.42 to 0.98, with 1 being very highly vulnerable. We were, as I mentioned, able to sustain relationships with 14 different organizations. This basically resulted in engagement of almost 800 individual community members. We broke down our engagement by a couple of different categories as well. So we looked at local engagement, so engaging with local grassroots organizations, regional engagement, so engaging with larger regional-based organizations that maybe do work in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then finally engagement with national organizations that actually have local chapters within the San Francisco Bay Area. We further stratified by the types of organizations that we engage. So we engage with organizations that provided senior citizen services, organizations that really focused on health and healthcare-based initiatives, faith-based organizations, among many others. I mentioned the number of individuals that we engaged. One of the things that we really wanted to emphasize as part of this project was the idea around just how much work it really takes to build sustainable relationships. And this is I think a major shortcoming of a lot of research, is that researchers don't truly understand the time and effort that it takes to quote unquote build trust. So the way we tackle this and approach this is that we actually kept track of every single point of contact that we had with community organizations for the entire year. Every single phone call, every single email, every single educational event, every point of contact that we had with community organizations, we logged somewhere and followed over the course of the year to really better understand just how much time and how much effort it takes to build sustainable, trusting relationships. And so in order to be able to build these relationships, we found that we had to engage organizations, I believe around 110 times, just outside of our collaborative events. So we held a number of collaborative events, but outside of those collaborative events, we were engaging organizations on a continuous basis. It also took a significant amount of time in the midst of the pandemic, unsurprisingly, to get collaborative events up and running. So some of our collaborative events, we had to wait as long as 125 days from the first point of contact with an organization to the time where we were actually able to have a collaborative event with them. And so really, the data that we collected, I think really argues for this idea of the amount of effort that has to go into building these relationships, and really more than anything, the amount of time that it takes. So often researchers approach engagement for the purposes of recruitment with a very specific timeline around a grant, most often that they've structured. And those timelines very, very often are just completely off in terms of feasibility. And so what we've done since this project is we've obviously continued with this engagement strategy. We've engaged actually close to 1,200 individuals at this point. We've added, I think, 5 or 6 additional community organizations that we've engaged with. We've built additional projects as a result of this engagement work. So I helped actually spearhead a pipeline that we've built that helps guide folks in the community who are experiencing cognitive changes into specialized dementia care, whether it be at UCSF or elsewhere, because this was a huge need that kept coming up in terms of our different conversations with folks in the community. Tremendous amount of gratitude, as I realize I'm running out of time, tremendous amount of gratitude just to the organizations that were willing to engage with us, particularly many of the organizations in the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood. We're looking forward to the next phase of this also, which is actually having very candid, open conversations with organization leaders about what works, what doesn't work, how we can improve, and how we can do better. And we're actually looking to do a statistical analysis as well of our outreach efforts to really identify how we can become more efficient and more effective.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for your presentation. There is a question that has been asked, and the question is, did you all measure trust in relationship, ? If so, how?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So we did not directly measure trust. That is actually one of the next things that I want to do in terms of our engagement efforts. And so that's going to require us to have basically in-depth one-on-one conversations with organization leadership, where we actually ask them about, do they feel like they trust us? When did that trust occur? What are the factors that built that trust? We were also very deliberate about our engagement in terms of a no-ask approach. So the title of this is Engagement Through More Inclusive Research. But when we initially approach communities, we approach communities just from a standpoint of service. So we went in with the attitude and the message that we just want to talk with you about brain health. We're willing to offer our time, expertise, knowledge. All we want to do is provide you knowledge and information. That's it. No ask in the beginning. And so as those relationships have developed, we've been able to have more conversations about specific asks. And I think that's one of the next asks that we're going to put forth is, do you feel we're in a trusting relationship at this point? How did that occur for you? When did that occur, et cetera?
Another question is, are you connecting with others at UCSF, engaging these same organizations? ? Are we overburdening them with multiple disconnected engagements? ? Do you have a way of knowing whether or not this is the case? ?
Sure. So I think one of the challenges actually that many individuals face, specifically who are interested in disparities research, who work at UCSF, is that I do believe we're overburdening a lot of these organizations. So Rafiki actually is one in particular. The number of questions that they get, the number of inquiries they get, particularly from UCSF researchers, is profound. And I think one of the issues is that I'm still searching, and I think others may be as well, for a centralized place where all of this information is kept. It would be wonderful to have a living, breathing document that contain, and obviously I understand this is difficult from a feasibility standpoint, it'd be wonderful to have a living, breathing document that contains so many of the wonderful efforts that we've heard about today, where say you're interested in engaging with an organization, you can actually go to this document and figure out who has already engaged with that organization, what projects are they working on, and maybe there are actual ways for you to collaborate with the person leading that project and that organization. I think looking forward, it's really an important thing to consider is how are we going to tackle the escalating demands and the escalating asks that we're placing on different community-based organizations.
I want to be respectful of people's time because I do realize that we're coming to the end. So I'm actually going to stop sharing our screen because I believe at this point we've seen all of the amazing presenters and their posters. Victor, I don't know if you wanted to say anything in closing.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the presenters today. You did fantastic with your presentations, and all of your presentations are so relevant and so important in the work that needs to get done.
Victor, I think you cut out.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I just want to thank the presenters. I want to thank the audience. You guys are doing great work, and thank you all for attending the short oral session today. And I hope that all of you will consider returning tomorrow for our second day of the symposium.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the presenters and all the really engaging questions. I think we can go ahead and stop recording now.